Well, we are very fortunate here to have an outstanding, that's the thing, we do have outstanding examples of women in STEM in our state. We just need more of them, right, ladies? With us here, we have Dr. Josie Schaefer. She was the head there, the director of the Center for Public Affairs Research here at UNO. We have Dr. Agnes Lena from STREC. Thank you for being here. Dr. Christine Kutsukaki. She is the director of the UNO STEM Trail Center. Did I get it right? I was practicing. She's got a tough one, ladies and gentlemen. And I've been saying it wrong for like a year, so thank you for correcting me. That's important. But she runs the UNO STEM Trail Center, which just does terrific work here and around the state. And then we're also very fortunate to have Nancy Williams here with us, the founder of No More Empty Pots. So thank you all for being here. Let's welcome them. The first question I'll go ahead and send to Josie, since she has worked with us now for months on this. What, as you've done this work, really resonated with you about this work? Taking a step back from being the one doing it maybe, but as kind of a woman in STEM yourself, what resonated with you, and is there one particular quote or idea that really stood out? And it'll be the same question for y'all, so. Go ahead and flip. There's a switch on top of the microphones. Put this little microphone.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here. It's so exciting to share this with folks. We've been working on it, and I know how important it is and how impactful it can be, and so I just want to thank these partners for getting it to all of you. I also have to give out one other funding partner. NASA Nebraska, Dr. Scott Terry over there, gave us money for our graduate assistant during the research phase of this work. What resonates with me? Obviously, all of it. I am always kind of impressed by Nebraskans. I'm not an original native Nebraskan, right? So I can kind of look from the outside. And a lot of times when people ask me to do research, I go, oh, you don't want to know the answer. It's not going to be great. But it was not all horrible stories. There certainly were stories that rose to the level of sexual harassment and real gender inequity. And I was always surprised that people didn't sue over it, but they didn't. But there were a lot of remarkable stories about what is our everyday lives. All of us are biased. I am biased as a woman. Men are biased. The workplace is a hard place to navigate. But what we mostly heard were women that recognize their advantages and their disadvantages, and we're working within the system to change things. And so I was really happy to know that I am surrounded here in Nebraska by women who want the best for others, who want to see change for all, and they are working within the system to do that. And that, I thought, was very impressive and a very optimistic outlook for women in STEM here in Nebraska.
Yes.
From the report, I am very happy to say that I am part of the 4% in Nebraska that is both woman and Latina, because there's not a lot of us. Two more here, Itzel and Pamela. Very excited to have you here today. But I would say that what resonated is how much positive is also hidden in the report. It's true. In order to be a woman in STEM, you need to have grit. And I absolutely love that word because it captures every single little aspect of what a woman truly needs to be able to survive in this world that's predominantly dominated by men. The quote where one of the interviewers said, you have to suppress your identity. I found that is absolutely true. I have a very thick accent sometimes, so I tend to hide that. I tend to adopt the culture of what's around me and tone down, because Latina, I could be very loud, and you can tell by looking at me what my thoughts are at any given point. The fact that another interviewee brought up that sometimes in a room they look at you, wow, that actually came out of your mouth. Wow, I'm actually validating that you know what you're talking about. That has happened a lot. I have my PhD, biomedical science also, but I am in a world of business and law. And sometimes we'll be discussing R&D studies and they'll say, oh yeah, this protein went up. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, obviously, because it's really related to this or this other thing. And everybody just looks at me and says, oh, where did that come from? I thought you were just here to look at the contract. You know, the report was something that I believe that the state of Nebraska really needed. So thank you.
What stood out to me the most is the action planning. I really appreciate that. You know, I appreciate how Dr. Schaefer's team captured so much of the qualitative story, and that gave us lots to work with. But, you know, that's one thing, and then the importance of moving forward. And so, you know, some of the takeaways that I have from the report are the professional networking. And for those of you that know me, networking is basically death. I think I would prefer death in many instances personally, but that's a story for another day. But it gives us an action plan, right? So being able to create opportunities for networks. And I think that the Women's Fund of Omaha with the Circles initiative does a great job of that, you know, putting to action this very suggestion. So I just wanted to highlight that positive.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, all of the things that have been said already. And the thing that stood out to me, so I have to be transparent in that I did not get to the entire report yet. There are bits and pieces, but I did read the whole summary and made notes on that. But the thing that stood out to me was the how we have so much of this information and the, how should I say, the insight from the few women of color that were here, and how it's such a small part, but it's such a big part. And many of us have had these experiences. And I will say that what I'm finding as I have navigated different areas of work and collaboration in STEM has been somewhat continuous through those, from science and academia, and then going into agriculture, where there's a lot of science, but people don't play that up. It's one of those things that we have going for us in Nebraska, where we can get more people into science pathway, and then into technology, and how certain things just keep showing up, especially the experience of when you have these intersectional experiences and you have the academics to go with it. People don't expect you to actually know these things. They think that you're just in the room, and it's like, I won't use the F-bomb today. I've been working on changing. It is my go-to word. I use it for a lot of things. But I'm trying to hold on to it, y'all, but I don't know if I'm gonna make it today, because this is one of those hot button things for me. The one thing that I will say is, from what was shared here and the potential. I'm not from Nebraska either, but I've been here for 29 years, and potential is always the word that comes up for me. And with this study, it illuminates more of that potential, but I'm going to push us to what's the gap that I see here is that we're not really working towards whole people, whole selves. We're still working within the construct of what we believe the system should be, instead of shaking up the fucking system. Sorry, came out. But that's the part I'm going to be pushing for, because in all of these circles, I can see that we are continuing what is the status quo, working within it, when we really need to shake that up, and we have the opportunity to do that.
Terrific, thank you, Nancy. I'll start with Agnes for the next one. I'm trying to start with different people each time. How do you think the pandemic has changed experiences for women in STEM, either for the better or the worse?
That is very interesting. I have a friend that had to quit her job in academia to be able to stay at home with her 2 little girls, because there was no school, there was no daycare. Her husband works outside of the home. You know, not everybody has the luxury of actually being able to go back into the office.
Yeah.
Not every company in Nebraska is also letting you work remote. that's, one downside. Positive is that some of us have spouses or additional support that is allowed to work from home. Can say my husband works from home, he works with computers. So when we were in lockdown, he was able to stay at home. My PTO has accrued, so I think that's a positive.
Yay.
I have additional support. It has allowed me specifically to, see my career move forward. So I'm very grateful, but I also acknowledge that not everybody has that luxury.
Christine?
I remember when we started to hear about the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak, and I was chatting with my husband and just sharing a little bit about virology in general, and told him about what we know about viruses, what we know about biology, and what came out of left field for me was the social aspects. So as a scientist, we can talk about how viruses enter cells, how viruses are picky about which cells they enter, how they go on to replicate, how they disperse around the body, all of the phenotypes that come with that. But it was so different being a biologist and then seeing all of the social impact. Everything from media campaigns talking about the outbreak to how folks would respond to the media campaigns regarding the outbreak, all the way through the very things that Agnes just shared, of the disparities within families providing care. Of course, we were all in the same boat of, okay, child, please be quiet for this Zoom. Here's some good bribery. We'll go to Dunkin' Donuts at the end of the day, whatever you need, right? And I think that obviously this is a tremendous tragedy, but the positive that has come of it is the increased science literacy. Certainly there are still some myths that, compound as a result, but I've heard a lot more people talking about biology since 2020 than I ever had in my life. And I think that's good. It's providing more conversation, more folks are asking questions about science in general. We've seen a huge need for more nurses and physicians, PAs, etc. And so, it's like that extra oomph to get people in the pipeline and see how they could have a role in caring for others. So it's maybe a different viewpoint, but as a biologist, that's what really stood out to me. And I was always like, what is this? What people? So people are influencing no, this is a biological pathway. And I struggled to compute how, these different factors. So, yeah, I'm the super nerd of the group, perhaps. So, yeah, bear with me.
That's exciting. Actually, I had to stop the program because it would never resolve. It was illogical, and you just have to stop it because you couldn't ever get to something that made sense. So I totally understand that. I am also excited about science literacy because the more people that are engaged in it becomes commonplace, and then you can help demystify it. There was a quote in here where someone was, one of the interviewees was talking about how we engage in STEM every day. And it's like, yeah, you're breathing. Like if you're alive, you're engaged in STEM. So it's not that these little boxes, it's like ubiquitous everywhere. And the more that people can understand that, the greater that we can get to these places where we can realize the full potential. The thing that stood out to me the most was because I'm in this position where all of my children are adults and 3 of the 4 are in STEM in some way. And so we have these conversations all the time and understand what's going on. But the exciting part of all of this to me is that we get a chance to really pay attention to each other and get to what I think of as one of my favorite things to think about. There's a book called Emergent Strategy. If you haven't read it, I would suggest taking a look at that. But in the concept of fractals and how we are responsible for, like, if we do our thing and then someone else models that, and then we're all doing that thing and we're just a composite of all of us doing our own work, wouldn't that be amazing? So if everybody washed their hands and everybody, like a lot of this other stuff would not be an issue. So the thing that stood out to me is how we get to our self-awareness and our work and how that can carry over to all of the other things that we have in life.
Love it. Josie.
So when I'm not working on this, I've actually given a lot of data-based presentations on the workforce in Nebraska and tracked it through COVID-19. And COVID-19 had a disproportionate negative impact on women and people of color in Nebraska and in the US very, very clearly. And it's a result of two things. One is structural. So we find that less women work in high-wage jobs in Nebraska. And high-wage jobs like computer and math and STEM and technology went remote really easily, right? If you're on a computer, you went home, it was easy. And more women and people of color tend to work in low-wage jobs. Service, restaurant industry, right? Can't go home. You just got laid off because no one was coming either.
Right.
So structurally disproportionate impact on women and people of color because they were already not working in those jobs that more easily transitioned to remote. And actually I pulled this stat because I think it's important. In Nebraska, 25 years or older with a bachelor's degree, more women than men have bachelor's degrees. So there is no reason for that disproportionate impact. They have the high skills to be in high wage jobs, but they're not. The other one was cultural, right? We have these biases that we learned a lot about in the study. Women in Nebraska are thought to be the main caretakers of home and children. And so when two parents basically could go remote, let's say, it was still a disproportionate impact on women to help out in all of those other ways. So I think it's structural and I think it's cultural, and then I think the pandemic maybe could have taught us a lot of great lessons about how we can create work-life balance for women and people of color, and it didn't. So I've compared to nationally, the percent of people that could work remote that did. And Nebraska was always lower than the US average and is almost down to 0 in terms of working full time. So I think culturally we had the opportunity to create some space for change, right? Change up that rigged system. We didn't. So its impact is still, I think, being felt. And I think we had a moment where we could have embraced change and I don't know that we did.
I'll add one more thing. Sure. It quickly became very visible, the situation that women had while they were at home. I can't tell you the number of Zoom meetings that I sat down where, we had male attorneys, we had the business development counterpart at the big corporation, and then we had the women equivalent, and you could hear the kids screaming in the back. And that became quickly acceptable. Excuse me, I have to, I'm sorry, the teacher is asking me, just hold on 5 seconds. That enabled more visibility as to what our situation is. The fact that we're not just workers, we're also mothers, spouses, we have a different life. Work-life balance might not be as real, it might be more of a work-life juggle situation, try not to drop the crystal ball, drop the plastic ones. And that's something that now more people see it. And I know that specifically where I work at, it's something that has enabled more flexibility in our day-to-day.
We'll move to the next question. Is there a unique challenge for your sector of STEM? Now, you're in charge of a STEM trail center, so maybe you can say that about it as well, but you're also in biology, and so feel free to share on either front.
Say the question again.
Just, is there a unique challenge for your sector of STEM?
I think one of the perhaps unique challenges, although I'm sure others have this very same challenge, is on the research front, pivoting to conducting research that is remote, keeping teams engaged remotely. That is a huge challenge. None of us were trained in how to do things online, and I am a huge follower of Patrick Lencioni. So if you're, interested in leadership, I love all things leadership. and love to discuss effective leadership. And that's the model that we really follow with folks, is the Lencioni model. And that is very much a team-based, in-person, active type of a model. And so moving to online and then trying to do different types of research under that capacity is severely challenging. And what goes along with that is, many of us are submitting articles, peer-reviewed articles for publication, and I've seen it on the author front where I'll submit an article, and during the pandemic, the amount of time that it takes to get feedback is outrageous. And wearing my editor hat, I see that everybody's rejecting my invite to review. Why would they? I send a really nice email, sometimes I add a smiley face, would you please? And, they don't respond. And so, for me, it's not that big a deal. I'm a professor, I'm not on the tenure track, and so it's not that big a deal anymore. But for my colleagues who are on the tenure track and my students, that is a huge deal, because we all know that finding the jobs, getting hired for the jobs depends very much on that research and the research output. And those two things have made it really challenging to be a scientist. So I don't know how unique that is, but that one stands out for me.
Do you think the need to find funding for science or writing your own grants and getting that, do you think that's something that causes a barrier or not for women, or do you think that's about the same?
So there are a lot of data out on this, actually. So the federal agencies continue to publish their data regarding who gets funding, when, what their strategy of funding success has been, and we've actually seen funding rates increase. So depending on the RFP that we've been submitting to over the last decade, it's been about 1 to 10% in terms of funding success rates, which for my colleagues who were applying for funding in the 90s, that's like, what? But now we are continuing to move up, and now it's more like 30% funding. And so actually the funding frequency from the federal agencies has indeed improved. And NIH, for example, I'm going to speak only from the data perspective. NIH has put in strategies in order to help folks get more access to funding earlier in the process, and to expand it more than just the few folks that hold the R01s, for example. So it's gotten better, actually, but having the time to put that together, I always tell folks, if you don't have the publishing track record, then there's really no point in applying for the grant, because they're going to look at that past productivity. Every time I talk with a NSF program officer, they're like, past productivity, recent past productivity, what have you done lately? And so everything's connected. If the papers aren't reviewed in time, the papers aren't accepted in time, that puts someone behind in terms of asking for the funding. So funding rates have increased with an asterisk.
Nancy, I will repeat the question, since we went on a little bit there, but is there a unique challenge for your sector, a STEM, where you're a part of the world, I guess, of agriculture?
Yes, so a lot happened with food, and we're still in that space. It's just exacerbated the issues that were already there, and now they're more visible. Sometimes we've taken some liberty and put the learning into action. I always challenge, do we learn if we really didn't do anything about it, or are you just more aware? And so to Josie's point, we have data, we are more aware, but what is the action that goes to it? So I was very excited to see the listen then act, because to me this is one of the basic tenets of adaptive leadership, which most of us have engaged in on every level in the past couple of years. So for us, the work that we do is more of the application of the research and the things that are going on in the world, because we try to take what are best practices, things that may be new or novel or in a different discipline, and pull it over so that it makes a difference in the lives of the people that we're working with every day. So the things that have changed is how food is distributed, supply chain, all of that. has been disrupted and is under. There's some innovations there, but then there's some things that just don't need to exist anymore. I'm thrilled that there's more focus on local foods, because that was one of the reasons why we focus on local foods, is because it has that potential to build more resilience into the system and add more economic justice opportunities to it as well. So people get paid for the contribution and not the value in the chain that other people are deciding. And so there's a lot that we can take from the larger issue and how it's being addressed in food. USDA has pulled in, there's somebody printing money somewhere for as much money as they have put into grants and opportunities, probably close to $1 billion in what's happening. But they're also seeing some shifts because of that, and there's been more equity for women and people of color getting access to funding to do the things that they know will make a difference for the people in the communities, which is what we want to see. And then taking that and pushing it back out so that we all learn from that.
Perfect. Josie.
So I think first comment, I'm a social science researcher, and sometimes I'm not included in STEM, and so we should be very inclusive in STEM. I think that's important. Just let me in, I want to help. The other thing I'll just say, so I'm an academic. We really tried to balance this report, academia versus industry. A lot of STEM is academics. There's a lot of folks working in industry. But I would say in reading it, sometimes I would think I was reading an academic, and I was actually reading a story from industry. So I think there are a lot of commonalities in terms of going back, workplace dynamics,
yes,
performance reviews, awards, sort of gendered work in the office, right? Taking notes, getting the coffee, advancement, negotiations. So I think more than anything, first, my little piece of STEM, I would say there's a lot we can do together to learn and solve these problems that we are all women in the workplace might face.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I would say that a unique challenge, so I'm in industry, medical devices specifically. A unique challenge is finding your voice. A lot of what we do in industry is also relying on experience, because when you go into a company, it doesn't matter if this is your third company, you need to sit down, listen, and then act, because you don't know what has come before you. It's being able to identify your mentor within the company, a buddy, somebody that's going to be there and tell you, well, hold on, I understand where you're coming from. Don't stay quiet during the meetings, express your opinion, but know that there's people here that what you're stating might have already been considered, and just be accepting while also, it's finding that balance of when to speak up. So it's a lot of what Josie said.
super important.
All right, our final question here. We'll start with you, Nancy.
Okay.
What recommendation that you've seen there in the report do you think is the most important to prioritize, or are there other ideas for improving retention and recruitment of women not in there that you'd like to share?
I love the recommendations. I love that advocacy is in here. One of the things that I talk to women the most about is trusting ourselves. It's not that we don't have confidence, it's not that we don't know things, is because when we have expressed the things that we know, we have all of these other voices and actors saying that we don't know what we know. And we create this dissonance where we can feel it in our bodies, we know what it is, but we have all of this other evidence around us is saying that we don't know it, and we start to disconnect that. So the thing that honestly I talk about the most is retraining, being able to trust your gut. And when you can do that, you can bring in all of these other influences and experiences, and also make the best use of a mentor. Because if you can't trust yourself, how are you going to trust someone else giving you advice? So we have to do that work ourselves so that we can know for ourselves what is our truth, how we are bringing that lived experience to bear, and then how do we take in all of the other things around us. So being able, the other thing is having a safe space to do that. When we have all of this going on around us and we don't feel safe, and I've been reading a lot about, because of the pandemic, how do we get to curiosity? Because that's important for getting into a STEM pathway. And especially what kids have gone through in the past 2 years, many of them don't feel like they're in a safe space. So that curiosity isn't naturally there. It's gonna be even tougher for us to get them onto a STEM pathway. Girls, boys, non-gender, anybody. And we have to do, because we are humans that need to feel safe so that we survive. And in order to get from a place of surviving to thriving and being able to not use grit to just get through the day, but use grit for discovery and being able to tap into the innovation, we have to learn how to create safe places, not only at work, but in community, because we spend time at work, but we're also in community with people all the time. So that's what I'll say about that.
You're speaking to my heart. You're speaking to my heart, so I love every word of what you just said. Josie.
So a lot of what we researched and heard really does focus on just what you're saying. Like, women need to find their voice in workplaces, in community. They need to ask for what they need to be successful. I also want to put some onus outside of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. There are great leadership books out there. There are best practices in making sure you're not letting your implicit biases inform your decisions at work. And women leaders and male leaders and anything in between really need to train themselves to not let that be. Hold people accountable, make sure people are working hard, get product, but that doesn't mean letting who they are inform your choices around them. And I think a lot of women are very educated on these topics and are really aware of how implicit bias affects us, right? Even women leaders, I am biased, I know it affects me. Are we making sure everyone in our workplaces as trained, as prepared, as knowledgeable about, there are very specific tools to help you do this. I was looking at something on performance reviews. When you use a very structured approach to performance review, you are less biased. So right, we can get out of this trap, but we are not using and advocating for use of these systems in our workplaces. And it really, yes, it should come from us, but we need leaders that want to do it with us.
I would say to that end, the professional development opportunities and access to networks. It's so hard when you first start, you fresh out of grad school, fresh out of your bachelor's, you start at a company. I love that the report brought up do you even know that you can negotiate your salary?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes, you can.
yes, absolutely. Yes, you can more than once. And if they say no to your salary, negotiate your 401k or your PTO. It's something that we now tell, a lot of people straight out, just passing down the street, you're interviewing, don't forget to negotiate. Yeah. If you have questions, come and ask me. I will tell you everything that I know that you can do. But we need to do better by women who are transitioning from one stage in their life to the next.
Yes.
What are the tools that are available to you? Because unless somebody who I consider my mentor today told me you can negotiate, I wouldn't have known. Without somebody saying, okay, well, you're this, the next step up would be management. This is some of the skills that you would need in management. I wouldn't have known. That also is also relying on network, identifying somebody and sharing each other's networks. I know that Christine hates network functions, but she's excellent at connecting people. She's a connector. So.
That is not on my Clifton strengths, by the way. Strategy and responsibility are on there, and not networking and connection. Oh, that's terrific. I really love that sentiment of professional development, though, because these are all unwritten rules. And I just completed a course. I said I would never go back to school. I'm never going back to school now that this is done. But I just finished a course about women in governance. So basically, how do you serve on a board? What are the things that you need to know to bring to the table? How can you be a value added for everything from corporate boards to nonprofit boards? And this was, these same sentiments were brought up over and over in the course of basically, if you're in the room, you need to speak so that people know you're in the room and that you have an opinion. There are many meetings that I go to and I'm like, cool, I didn't have to say anything. And so that was a really good lesson, but it is important. And so without having role models or mentors or specific professional development that help with these things, how's anyone supposed to know? I'm a first-gen college kid. It is a miracle, capital M, that I am where I am for many different reasons. But again, thanks to mentors and a strong, supportive network, great poker players, here we are very successfully. So, and Pamela just completed a study looking at one of our programs that we have for undergraduates and youth to help bring them into the STEM pipeline. And we looked at a decade worth of data, and the mentors matter. Yeah. Having access to mentors, it's a key takeaway. And we have really strong retention, and it's because of the mentorship. So, sometimes folks say like, oh yeah, get a mentor. Oh, you should find a mentor. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have a mentor and multiple mentors and mentors outside of an organization or outside of a particular group. Mentorship matters. So the very same sentiment on professional development to include the mentorship piece.
Can I throw one more in?
One last thing.
Sorry. The maternal wall is real. Even if you are not having kids, you might reach an age in your career where people think you should be having kids or you want to leave for having kids, and it affects how we work. And it affects how we're treated in the workplace. It affects what's expected of us. Nebraskan, 80% labor force participation rate for women. That's one of the highest rates in the country. Nebraskan women work. Nebraskan women also have children. We have a really high rate of natural change here in Nebraska. So women are going to have children and still be in the workforce. Not having paid time leave to have children is, I just can't understand why anyone who's ever had children, been around children, thinks that's good for us or thinks that's good for our kids, thinks that's good for our future workforce, right? We're trying to recruit and attract people here to Nebraska, and so not treating women well as they go through these normal processes in the workplace is, it's a little gross. I don't know how else to say it. And I am a mom, and so obviously I might have stronger feelings, but I think that expectation actually affects a lot of us, whatever our choices are about children, but we need to make workplaces that are friendly to people who have kids and will have kids, as well as who take care of other family across their lifespan too. We can't grow if we're not good to people who have children.
And sometimes it's taking care of a parent.
Yeah.
As they're aging. And so just being attentive or accommodating or finding ways to work with that. Well, thank you to this wonderful panel. Let's give them a